Hi everyone. So grab your laptops and think about that one child who's keeping you up at night, the one who's driving you to the brink, and get ready to tackle it head on. So today we're going to try to turn that struggle into progress. Today we're actually going to do something about it. So we're going to need two things. You're going to need a laptop and a positive attitude. No excuses. We're not here to tick a box or keep the paperwork police happy. We're here to make a real difference. So I just wanted to start by saying, remember why we signed up for this job in the first place. It definitely wasn't for the holidays, the pay, or the workload. We're here because we care about these children. So what are we going to look at today? We're going to look at the assess, plan, do, review cycle and craft an IEP together, or at least one target on it. So assess. First up, we're going to figure out what the child is actually good at. We're often more focused on what's going wrong, but we're going to start with the strengths and then we'll dive into the concerns. Then plan. Next, we'll get into the nitty-gritty, the smart targets, the realistic provisions and strategies that will actually work. No wishful thinking. If we can't deliver it, don't write it down. If you promise the world in an IEP, you're just setting yourself and the child up to fail. Then we've got the do. We'll get into the action plan and look at the difference between provisions and strategies. Then the review. We'll hit the review process. We're talking 6-week and 12-week checkpoints to see if we're on track. If not, adjust, fix it, and this is where we're going to figure out if all that planning was worth it. So by the end of today, you'll hopefully walk out of here with the bones of a perfect IEP. So let's cut to it and get started. Now, I'll probably repeat this a few times during the course of this, but we're not writing IEPs to tick boxes. We write them because every child deserves a real shot at thriving, and it's our job to figure out how to make that happen. That means making reasonable adjustments, properly assessing needs, then actually doing something about it. It isn't just paperwork for the sake of paperwork, it's about making a difference. Now I thought we could look at some of the laws that we've got to follow. So the Children and Families Act 2014, Section 19 couldn't be clearer. The child's best interests come first. It tells us to focus on their views, wishes and feelings. We're not here to do the bare minimum, we're here to help them achieve the best possible outcomes. This is about pushing for what's right and not just checking off another task on our to-do list. Then there's the SEND Code of Practice 2015, Section 6.2, which says just because a child's underperforming doesn't mean they have special educational needs. And on the other side of that, just because a child is meeting age-related expectations doesn't mean they don't have special educational needs. So we need to stop thinking that end-of-term or end-of-year assessments tell the whole story. We're here to assess the whole child, not just their academic output. And of course, we've got the Equality Act 2010, Section 20, which says we have to make reasonable adjustments to avoid putting disabled pupils at a disadvantage. And these aren't suggestions, they're legal obligations. But don't treat it like some bureaucratic hoop you've got to jump through. We're not here to do the bare minimum, we're here to make sure these children get the support they deserve. And bottom line, yes, we're legally obligated to do all this, but that's just the floor. The ceiling is going beyond compliance and actually making a difference. So why do we do this? Because every child deserves a chance to thrive and it's our job to figure out how to make that happen. You've got a child in mind, someone who needs that extra push. Let's start with them. So what I'd like you to do is just turn to the person next to you and tell them who you're going to focus on today. Okay, now that we know the name of the child, let's get one thing straight. We all tend to zoom in on weaknesses. It's human nature. You see the struggles, the gaps, the oh no, they're falling behind moments. But before we dive into that mess, we're starting with what this child is actually good at. The strengths first. And why? Because if we don't know what a child can do, how are we supposed to help them build on it? This isn't some feel-good, fluffy, let's all be positive nonsense. It's about knowing what they're good at so that we can use it to our advantage. So now, grab that child you've been thinking about, figuratively, Turn to the person next to you and tell them something positive about that child. And before you even try it, nothing isn't an option. If you can't come up with a single strength, I think that's a bit of a red flag about your relationship with this child, and we'll really need to work on that. Now would be a good time, if you can, to pause me so you can have a little chat. Now that we've got the strengths, we're going to put them in the strengths section of the IEP. Now, I don't need your life story here. This isn't the time for long-winded paragraphs that make you sound smart. Just jot down the strengths in bullet points. Quick, digestible, and to the point. Remember, the next person who picks up this IEP should be able to understand it in under a minute. This is really important, especially for transitions, but also if you happen to be ill or away on training, for the supply teacher to know exactly what works well for that child. Alright, we've been through the nice stuff, and now it's time to get real. Why are we even doing this? What's the actual issue? What's the reason this child needs an IEP? And here's where you lay it out. And I just want to be crystal clear, don't sugarcoat it. This isn't the place for vague statements or tiptoeing around the problem. We're here because there's something that's not working for this child. And it's your job to spell it out. Keep it short, keep it specific, and purposeful. If you don't, you're only making it harder on yourself, and more importantly, on the child. So what's going wrong? Are they the kind of kid who can't stay on task for more than 30 seconds? Constantly daydreaming, looking out the window, or finding anything more interesting than the lesson? Write it down. Can't sit still. Blurting out random stuff, constantly getting up. If the classroom is a bit of a zoo and this kid's the ringmaster, we need to know. Don't dance around it, just say it. Is the content going over their head? Are they struggling with basic maths or literacy skills? Maybe it's not just that they don't understand the lesson, it's that they can't because they're missing the foundational skills. This is really important. Are they having trouble understanding you? Or are they not able to express what they need? Communication isn't just about speaking, it's about understanding what's being said too. If they're missing cues or not following instructions, that's a big deal. Maybe it's not about the lesson itself, but about the fact that they're anxious, withdrawn, or lashing out. Social and emotional issues often get masked as behaviour problems, so let's not overlook them. If they're struggling emotionally, we need to know that. Whatever it is, put it down. And I just want to reiterate, you don't need to write an essay about how little Timmy can't sit still, or why Mary is falling behind in maths. We don't have time for that. Just give it to us straight in bullet points, short, sharp, and to the point. As I said earlier, anyone reading this IEP should be able to get a clear picture of the needs in less than a minute. Remember, no fluff, no long-winded explanations, just facts. You've got to make it easy for everyone else to understand the problem, because if this part isn't nailed down, the rest of the IEP process is going to be a mess. This is where the work starts. So if you can't be clear and specific here, you're setting yourself up for failure down the line. Now would be a good time to pause so that you can do it. Alright, so we've nailed down what's going wrong. You've got the areas of concern in front of you. Now we need to match those to the 4 broad areas of need. Don't overcomplicate it, just figure out which of these categories your concern falls under. Is it cognition and learning? Are they struggling to understand concepts or keep up with the class? Communication and interaction, is speaking, listening, or understanding language the issue? Social, emotional, and mental health, are emotions, anxiety, or behaviour getting in the way? Sensory and physical, are physical needs a barrier? And don't be fooled by the sensory in this. This isn't about sensory processing. It's about things like visual impairment and hearing impairment. Okay, so now that you've got your concern matched to one of those 4 areas, it's time to craft a target. So before we begin, vague goals aren't helping anyone. If your target is something fluffy like improve behaviour or do better in class, scrap it. It's not a target, it's wishful thinking. A good target is one you can measure, something that shows clear progress, not something that leaves you shrugging your shoulders at review time, wondering if it's been met. And not just any target, a SMART target. That means specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And in a minute, I'm going to give you some time to craft your target and take this seriously. This is the backbone of the whole IEP. If you mess this part up, everything else falls apart. So ask yourself, specific, what exactly are you trying to achieve? And be clear, improve focus isn't specific. Stay on task for 10 minutes during the independent work is. Measurable. How will you know when the target is met? What's your metric? Are you counting minutes of focus, number of questions answered? Whatever it is, make sure you can track it. Achievable. Is this realistic? You're not here to perform miracles. If the child currently focuses for 30 seconds, don't make the target 30 minutes. That's just setting them up for failure. Relevant. Does this target actually address the child's specific needs? Don't throw in random goals that aren't aligned with their areas of concern. And time bound. When are you expecting to see progress? Give yourself a clear time frame. We're talking like 6-week or 12-week checkpoints. No more open-ended targets that drag on forever. So now take a few minutes to craft your SMART target for the child you've been thinking about. Be specific, be clear, and make it realistic. It's not about creating a perfect child, it's about measurable progress. Again, this will be a good point to pause so that you can get on with it together. Now, let's look at success criteria. Success criteria need to be measurable. Not, we'll see how it goes, or maybe they'll improve. It's not a plan, that's a daydream. If you don't have something clear and trackable, how are you supposed to know if you're making progress? You can't just hope for the best. You need to be able to say, yes, this is working, or no, we need to adjust. So here's where most people mess up. They wait until the end of the IEP cycle to figure out if it's working. That's a mistake. We're going to check in at 6 weeks to make sure everything's on track. At the 6-week mark, you should be able to look at the success criteria and see if it's being met. If not, that's your cue to course correct. Something's off, fix it. Don't wait until week 12 to realise you've been off the mark for weeks. Then comes the 12-week review. This is where you write the next IEP, so by this point you need to know if the child hit the target or not. You're either there or you're not. It's not a grey area. The whole point of measurable success criteria is to give you a clear yes or no answer. Did the child improve focus? Yes or no? Did they stay on task for the required amount of time? Yes or no? No maybes, no excuses. So here's the bottom line. If your success criteria aren't measurable, you're wasting everyone's time. You're not just writing down vague hopes, you're setting clear targets that you can track. By the time you hit 12 weeks, you need to know whether the child made progress or not. So don't overcomplicate it. Make it measurable, make it real, and don't wait until the last minute to check if it's working. What I found works well is by thinking, what will it look like at 12 weeks? Then working back and thinking, well, what would I expect to see at the 6-week mark? Now would be a good time to pause so you can have time to write that down. Alright, so now we've got our targets. Now comes the part where you figure out how you're actually going to hit them. So this is where strategies and provisions come into play. So first off, let's make one thing clear. Strategies are the things you can do right now, like tomorrow. These are the simple adjustments to your teaching or classroom environment that don't require a pile of paperwork or meeting with the school's leadership team. Seating arrangements, using visual aids, giving extra time. These are the quick wins that you can control directly. But here's where you need to get critical. Will that seating change actually help? Is the extra time you're going to give them going to make a difference? Or are you just hoping it will? Be honest with yourself and don't just slap down strategies just to fill space. Now, provisions. That's a different ballgame. Provisions are the things that require a little more muscle. Maybe it's extra staff, maybe it's specialist equipment, or maybe it's a specific intervention program. Whatever it is, it's going to take time, planning, and sometimes money. But again, be critical. Will this provision actually make a difference? So just because a provision sounds fancy doesn't mean it's going to solve the problem. You can throw all the TAs and therapy sessions you want at a child, but if it's not the right fit, you're wasting everyone's time and resources. And you can't promise the world. We'd all love to give every child every resource, support and therapy they need the moment they need it. But this is the real world, not some education utopia. You've got limits. We all do. So be realistic, but effective. In an ideal world, we'd be handing out art therapy and one-to-one support like it's sweets. But that's just not how it works. We've got budgets. And if there's a 6-month waiting list for the provision you're thinking of, it's not helping the child right now, is it? So yes, we'll do what's needed, but remember, resources are finite. Don't overpromise. Don't commit to things you can't deliver. Set yourself and the child up for success, not disappointment. You're not a miracle worker, and no one expects you to be. And before you write anything down, ask yourself, will this actually help this child? If not, don't bother. Because half-baked strategies and promises you can't keep aren't going to help anyone. So again, now would be a good time to pause and start jotting down some strategies and provisions that you could put in place to help this child. Okay, let's talk about parents. So whether they're your favourite part of the job, or the reason you duck behind a door when you see them coming, they're a key part of this whole process. And here's the thing, you need to be confident and clear when you sit down with them. It's not the time for maybe or we're considering. You've done the work, you've assessed the needs, you know what this child requires. Own that. But then here's the twist. The parents are also an expert. They know their child in ways we never will. They've been in the trenches, wiping tears, calming meltdowns, navigating the maze of what works and what doesn't. So yeah, even if they're driving you nuts and you're tempted to bolt the second you see them walking your way, take a step back. Remember, they're just trying to advocate for their child. And even if their approach grates on you, understand that they want the same thing you do. The best for this child. And legally, they've got every right to fight for that. So when you sit down with parents, you're the expert in the classroom. So speak like one. Frame your feedback with authority. Start by explaining what you've observed, then lay out the plan. Be direct, be clear. You're driving this car, so act like it. But, and here's the part some of us forget, you've also got to listen. After you've presented your observations and plan, ask if there's anything else going on at home. Sometimes what happens outside the classroom is the missing piece to understand what's happening in the classroom. So when you're getting parent voice, it's not a, what do you think session. You're not asking for permission to do your job, but you're also not dismissing their input. Lay out the plan, then give them a chance to tell you if there's anything else you should know. And here's something that we can't ignore. What happens at home affects what happens at school. If the child's home life is chaotic, stressful, or unstable, guess what? That's going to spill over into the classroom. So when you're talking to parents, don't just focus on the child. Ask about the bigger picture. How are things going at home? Is the family coping? Do they need support too? Because like it or not, you're not just working with the child. You're working with the whole situation. And sometimes the best thing you can do for a child is to help the family get the support they need. So maybe they need someone to help them navigate services, or maybe they just need someone to listen. Whatever it is, don't just focus on the classroom, look at the wider picture. So bottom line, you're in control of the classroom, but don't underestimate the parents' role. They've been on the front lines, they know their child better than anyone, and they've got a right to be part of the conversation. So own your expertise, but don't forget to listen to theirs. So I hate the word non-negotiable, but this part is non-negotiable. We're here for the children. Everything we're doing, the assessments, the targets, the meetings with parents, it all boils down to one thing: making sure the child thrives. And if we're not listening to the child, then what are we even doing? Here's where things usually go sideways: the child's voice. We all nod along, saying how important it is to include the child's perspective, but let's be honest, we often treat it like a box to tick. We ask a question, we scribble down something vague, and then we move on. So let me be blunt, don't make this tokenistic. If you're not actually listening to the child, you're wasting everyone's time, including your own. And more importantly, you're failing the one person you're supposed to be helping. When you're sharing an IEP with a child, break it down in terms they can understand. Ditch the jargon and the long-winded explanations. The child doesn't care about acronyms or educational buzzwords. They need to know what's happening in a way that makes sense to them. Keep it simple, keep it clear, and most of all, keep it real. Then, here's the key part. Ask for their input. Don't just ask for the sake of it, actually listen. What they say might completely change how you approach things. Their concerns, what they find hard, what they absolutely hate about school, it's all valid. Make them feel heard, because if they feel like they're being ignored or dismissed, nothing else you do will matter. So remember, this isn't just a let's humour the child moment. This is where the real work happens. Because if the child is telling you what's wrong and you're too focused on your plan to hear it, you're missing the point entirely. I feel like I'm saying the same thing over and over, but it's so important. We need to care what the child has to say. They're the ones living this every day. If they're telling you something's not working, that's your cue to stop and rethink your approach. This is where we need to pay attention, because what the child says could change everything. If they tell you they're struggling with something specific, or they feel overwhelmed, it's not just feedback, it's the key to unlocking how you're going to help them succeed. And if you're not willing to hear them out, then you're just as bad as the system that's failing them. So the bottom line is, the child's voice isn't just important, it's everything. Take it seriously. Alright, so you've made it this far. You've survived the deep dive into strengths, concerns, targets, provisions, and the whole process, but none of that matters if you don't actually write the IEPs. So this is where the rubber meets the road, so before you mentally check out and start thinking what you're going to have for dinner, let's focus. Sit down, use this time wisely, and try and write the best possible IEPs that you can for the children in your class. And just one final thought. You're not just filling out paperwork. You're laying the foundation for the child's success. So make sure it's done right.